Yo, what's good everybody? My name is Jay Fatty. Welcome back to another video. In our last video, we talked about making soulful, quirky boom bap. In this video, we got the same beat, but we're going to talk about mixing techniques as well as when to master your beats. So let's get right into it. So if you haven't seen my last video about making this beat, I would definitely recommend checking that out. The link will be in the top right. You can click on that and watch the video and then come back to this one. All right, so we're just going to play the beat real quick. This is what we have so far. Got a different part over here as well. First step is we need to get all of these elements into the mixer. So there's an easy way we can do this. We'll go into the channel rack, select our first element by left clicking, just left click and drag so all of these elements boxes are highlighted like so. Actually, before we do that, let's rename this as our chops. Now we'll left click and drag to highlight all of the elements. Go into the mixer, and I'm just going to go to the first empty insert. I can right click and go to channel routing, route selected channel starting from this track, or do the shortcut Shift Control L. And it's going to route and name all of these elements for us, okay? So I like to color code my things in the mixer, just helps me out a little bit. All my drums I like to make red, so I'll hold Control and left click to drag to select all of the drum elements, right click, change color, and I'm just going to change it to earth red. Then my melodies, chops, samples, whatever, I'll change those to purple. We just got one chops and some drums, so it's very simple today. But before we start actually doing any mixing, I want to put some effects on the drums and a simple effect on the chops. What we're going to actually do is route all of our drums to what we call a bus. Right? A bus is just something that's going to group a bunch of similar elements together. That way you can have easier ways of mixing them, affecting them, what have you, stuff like that. So I'm going to do a Control left click, highlight all of my drums again. I have a drum bus on my preset already, but to get a bus over here on the left side, it's very simple. Go over here to an insert track, right click it, rename it, make sure it's an empty one. I'm just going to call it drum bus. You can change the color. I'll change it the same color as the drums, right? And now we're going to right click it and do dock to left. And as you can see, it moves it over here. You can hold Alt and press right on the directional pad to move it over. But notice it's at insert 66 and these are all in the hundreds. So I'll have to get past them if I want to move it over here. For example, if I show you, if we just move it up, see now it's moving over. Control left click and drag to highlight all your drums, right click the drum bus and do route to this track only. Now all of your drum elements are routed to that drum bus. Now, I like to throw on something like RC20. There are some alternatives out there, but they don't work as well as RC20. RC20 helps you get that sauce, okay? And I love Vinyl 3. This preset is pretty much the only preset I use for my drums, if I'm being honest with you. So let's listen to the drums by themselves without effect. Now with. You hear how that already added so much flavor and sauce to these drums? But if I go back into RC20, there are a few things we can do. I'm going to go over here to the mode, bring it down to the second option here. And I'm going to bring the tone knob to the left. This just changes up the sound of the drums, and I think it sounds a bit better. Also make sure that the stereo isn't on any of these effects. Like this magnetic, I take that stereo off. And then this space, this is reverb. I add a little bit of reverb, take the stereo off, and I mess with the focus so it's the higher frequencies in the drum loop. I don't really want it to give my kick or lower end frequencies much reverb. I'll mess with the decay as well. All right, the next thing we'll mess with is the noise over here. We have this follow knob. That's just going to make sure it follows the drums instead of always going. I'll bring that up, a decent amount, and I'll bring the noise level down a little bit. The noise can be annoying. All right, so the drums already sound dope. Now we're going to go over to the chops, and we're going to see if we can make this a little bit more stereo. First thing, we can bring the stereo with knob to the left a little bit. More to the left is the more stereo separated it's going to be, and the more to the right is the more merged or mono that it will be. Okay, so we'll just have it somewhere around here. But I also have this effect that I like to use called mid-side, Good Hertz mid-side 3. This adds some sauce. There's a preset in here. It's called wide with mono bass. You can mess with the frequency here, and anything below the frequency, that's going to be mono. So depending on the sample, we might have to mess with this, and we can mess with the bass makeup or almost how loud the bass will be. And then you also have some knobs up here to mess with how it sounds in the mid-range and the side range. So if we listen a little bit. I think it sounds good like that. I already know I'm going to need to equalize it a little bit. So I'll throw on a parametric EQ2, and I'm going to make sure the linear phase mode is on just so there's no phasing issues. In this mid-side 3, I also messed with the stereo width. I brought that down a little bit because there's a shaker sound that is getting affected by this mid-side plugin, and it's making it sound very annoying. We bring that down a little bit. It's not as crazy on the stereo width. It still sounds pretty good. Now that we got that, I'm also going to go in here and mono certain drums. For example, the kick, I just want that in mono, so I'll bring it all the way to the right. Same thing with the snare over here. All of these snares, actually. And the hi-hat, open hat. We probably won't mono the ride. We might actually stereo that a little bit. Same thing with the crash. Double check your RC20. Make sure that nothing on here is on stereo. And down here is a knob as well. We can make this go all the way to the left to completely put it in mono, but that would make all of the drums mono. As you saw, some of the drums I wanted in stereo a little bit. Keep that in mind. All right, now what we're going to do is actually mix this beat. Now that we got things affected and how we kind of want them, I'm going to control left click on the first element and highlight to select them all and just bring them all down to 0. We're going to start mixing these in one by one, starting with the drums, okay? So something I recommend before doing this is go into the playlist and highlight an area that has a lot of stuff going on that will just loop while you can do your mixing. That has pretty much all of the elements in it, so you can just mix with that 8-bar, 4-bar, 6-bar loop, and then the rest of the beat should sound pretty decent as long as you're mixing everything, right? And getting everything to a good level with each other. Because it's all about the mix, y'all. It doesn't matter about the master necessarily, because if the master will be bad if the mix is bad. The mix has to be good, then everything else will be good. All right, so we'll start with the first elements here, the drums. That sounds pretty dope, but do you hear how that noise is still kind of annoying? Let's down a little bit and mess with the follow some. All right, that sounds pretty good. Now I'm gonna bring up these chops, okay, and get them leveled with the drums. All right, so that sounds pretty good. Now what we can do is we're also gonna sidechain. All right, so sidechaining essentially is when one element ducks another when they're both going at the same time. So it makes room for the main element or the more important element of. For example, I'm going to sidechain these drums to my sample chops. Every time the kick, the snare hits, it's going to duck out the sample a little bit to really make room for the kick and the snare so it has that power that it should. So this drum bus right here, I'm just going to make sure I'm highlighted on my drum bus, and I'm going to make another bus called a sidechain bus. So the same process that we did before, go over to an empty insert, right click, rename it, sidechain bus, and then dock to left. I'm going to sidechain the drum bus to the sidechain. So make sure you're highlighted on the drum bus. Then you go down here and hover over this arrow on the sidechain bus, right click it and do sidechain to this track. All right, it's going to sidechain the drum bus to the track. Now all of these drums should be sidechained to this bus. Now we're going to go over to the chops and hover over this track as well and do right click, route to this track only. So the chop sound signal is only getting routed to the sidechain bus. Now on the sidechain bus, we'll put on a limiter, okay? If you go into the limiter and go over to the compression tab, there's the sidechain area. We can right click this and do drum bus. We want the drum bus to sidechain to the chops. Now we'll mess with the knee. We'll just bring this knob all the way to the right. Same thing with the ratio. And we're going to bring this threshold down to about a middle point where we see the kick is sounding good and it looks good in this graph here. You'll see. So if we listen to it and bring the threshold down. That threshold is at about the middle point of that kick. You see that blue? So anytime that blue kick and snare, other main points of the drums are hitting, it's mitigating the sample a little bit. You can see that purple, it's pushing that sound down a little bit to make room for those kicks and the snares, and it just makes it sound a little bit better. So that's why you'd want to sidechain. Once again, there are a bunch of different ways to sidechain. This is just the simplest way that I like to get a simple sidechain. We might have to mess with this a little bit later as the beat gets louder, but for right now, I think this is a good point. Also, another thing to keep in mind is messing with this release knob over here. We look and listen. The more left the release is, the shorter the kick has time to breathe, essentially. So the kick hits and then it goes right back into the chops. But if the release is long, the kick hits and gradually goes back into the chops. So keep that in mind. You can find a good point. So now we got our beat mixed. It's all about getting it loud. Like I said before, mixing your beat is the main thing. It's all about the mix. If your mix is bad, your master will be bad. And I know a lot of producers don't even like mastering their beats because if you're selling beats, for example, and a rapper buys your beat, why would they want to master their song over an already mastered beat? So you do have to keep that in mind, especially if you're trying to sell beats. But I would always recommend mastering your beats. I got a strategy for you, all right? What you can do is, if you're selling beats on BeatStars especially, you master your beats, and that mastered beat with your tags is the one that you're displaying. That's the one that shows off the beat to people that they can listen to on YouTube. They could write their lyrics, but then when they actually want to write, they buy your beat and say they buy the wave. They get an unmastered wave, so then they can master their own lyrics over the beat, and it doesn't sound like doo-doo at the end. All right? Same thing with the stems. If you sell stems, you can have the mastered version of the stems, then you can have another folder in the same folder that's the unmastered version of this. And we'll get to that. I just wanted to make that clear. I like to master my beats because I like it to be the fullest and the loudest it should be when I'm showing it off, essentially. But when it's actually time to work with an artist, you got to make sure they get the unmastered version so they can properly mix their vocals. Very important. All right, so mastering. I'm going to show you one way to master with just stock plugins, and then one way to master that I use with a couple extra third-party plugins. Okay, so this first way is a simple limiter, soft clipper, compressor. That's all you need. So if we listen to this beat, we do need to compress it a little bit. So over here on the master, I already have a limiter here. Right above the limiter, I'll throw a fruity soft clipper. And then right above the fruity soft clipper, I'll just throw a fruity compressor. Now, the way that I like to look at compression is all it's doing is exactly what it says. It's compressing the track. So say you have a track with a bunch of crazy transients. It's just going to push everything down, squish it, and make those transients closer together, which a lot of times can sound good, a lot of times can sound bad if you over compress. And a compressor can look very, especially the fruity compressor, you got 6 knobs here. You might not even know what any of them do. All you need to know is really the ratio, attack, release, threshold, and gain. You don't need to really worry about type. But essentially, this threshold is activating the compressor. This is telling the compressor when to compress. So if you're not messing with this knob, nothing's happening. The attack is how quickly the compression is happening on the transient in the simplest form, okay? And release is how quickly it's releasing that compression, essentially how quickly the compression goes away. Once again, in the simplest words I can put it. And the ratio is how much compression is actually happening. So if you have a low ratio, it's not going to be a crazy amount of compression. High ratios can have super crazy compression. A lot of people freak out if you do high ratios. I've noticed that. But you just got to do what sounds good to you. So we're going to mess with all of this a little bit, mess with the attack. We'll just throw some settings on here because I've done this a lot, so I know what kind of settings sound decent for boom bap. So we'll do something like this and mess with it as we listen. We'll mess with the ratio, bring it up like right here. And we'll start a little bit higher, and then we'll bring the threshold back. Let's just hear how things sound. See, the more I bring that threshold back, the more you really hear that compression going. It was sounding decent right around here. I might even need to mess with the ratio more. Now we want to bring it up in gain. That is what this knob over here is for. That sounds like a pretty good compression settings, at least to my ears. Let me know what you think of that setting on the compressor. Does that sound all right, or does that sound whack to you? Now, if I bring up the limiter and the soft clipper, this is where we're going to really get that loudness. So essentially, the ceiling on the limiter is acting like exactly that. It's going to completely cut transients at whatever point we set it. So I don't even like this ceiling at all. I don't. So I'm going to bring it all the way up and act like it's not even there. Okay? It's not there at all. We're going to actually use this saturation threshold over here, which acts as a soft clipper. And a soft clipper essentially rounds your transients instead of completely cutting it off at a certain point. Okay? This can give you a lot more control over your sound. And this soft clipper over here is doing the same thing before it even hits the limiter. So those transients are getting held around it, right? So they can really shine instead of just being cut completely. I think it sounds better overall. So what we're going to do is, like I said, bring the ceiling all the way up, and then we're going to bring this saturation knob to a good dB level. So once again, like I said earlier, if you're going to upload this to YouTube to show off your beats and you're trying to sell beats, I would put this to like negative 1.6 or something, where there's a little bit of dB before zero, a little bit of headroom is what you would call it, but it's going to still be very loud. All right. Now, your unmastered version won't be like this, so they can properly master their vocals. Remember that. So we'll keep it at negative 1.6. And then over here on the Fruity Soft Clip, I'm going to bring this threshold all the way down and this post up until I see these transients hitting the bottom of that saturation threshold that I set. If we listen. We brought the post up to about 94%, and that is getting those top transients to hit that threshold that we set. So the loudness should be just at about negative 1.6. That's the first way to master your beats using the stock plugins. Now, this other way that I'm going to show you uses two of these same plugins, but also uses two other ones that are third party. Let's get rid of all of these here. So we're going to start it off the same way, but instead of the limiter being on the bottom, we're going to put it up from second from the bottom here. Right, we're going to throw on a Fruity limiter, a Fruity soft clipper, but above that, instead of using a Fruity compressor, I'm going to use Good Hertz Vulf Compressor 3. This thing right here kicks some ass, all right? So if I go over here to Master Hump, that's the preset that I like to use. I'm also going to click on these three little dots here. And also, all of these plugins that I'm using will be linked in the description if you do want to check them out. But over here, if I click on these three little dots, the advanced controls, I'm going to go over here to the comp and ADV area. I'm going to bring the comp attack time all the way up to like 3.4. That's what I've noticed sounds good with my beats. And then the release, I'll bring down to like 0.3x, something like that. And I'm also going to bring HQ on, high quality mode on. Okay. So if we listen to how this sounds now. Sounds all right, but we need to mess with it a little bit. I'm going to bring the out up to like probably negative 5.5 dB. We might need to mess with it more. Bring the compression down because we don't need that much compression. Another thing we can do with this is we can bring up some crunch. Bring up the crunch noise. I brought it up to 58%, and then you got to mix it in with the lo-fi knob. I only brought that to 18%, but I'll show you how it sounds if we bring a lot of it in, but just a little bit can add sauce. Now that we got a good compression, the next two steps are essentially the same thing we did the first time around. I'm going to go into the limiter, go over to limit, bring the ceiling all the way up, and bring the saturation to negative 1.6. All right. Now I'm going to go into the soft clipper and do that same thing, bring the level up, but I'm not going to stop when I'm going to stop a little bit before the transients hit that threshold, because we got one more step after this to make it even louder. So once again, bring the threshold back on the Fruity soft clipper, and we'll bring the post up just until it's loud enough. I'll show you when we get there. So I didn't even do much. I just brought it up to like 84%, just to where those transients are very close. All right, now we're going to add in the other third-party plugin that we'll be using, which is called Ozone 9 Elements. This right here is some sauce. There's this thing on it called the Master Assistant. So the Mastering Assistant is going to analyze your track and give you a good starting point for a master. So if we hit next, then play this part of the audio. We are going to have to come in here and mess with it a little bit. I always turn True Peak on, bring the ceiling to what we actually want it to be, which will be the same ceiling we set in the Fruity limiter. So if it's negative 1.6, you would do that. and then you can mess with the threshold here. But I already know, I'm hearing this. They did a lot of crazy equalizing. I'm going to go over to the equalizer first and mess with this. So I had to do a little bit of messing around with the sidechain as well as the EQ on the chops a little bit, but it sounds good now. So we're going to go back to the ozone elements. You got to keep that in mind. Sometimes you got to go back to the mix a little bit and mess with some things. All right? Because the master is going to bring out, it's going to make everything loud. It'll bring out very, very, very small sounds or small things that you wouldn't have heard when you're mixing low. Okay? So we'll go back to the imager now. And I like to bring this to an overall width for the beat. Nothing too crazy. We'll either go like 11.1, 22.2, or 33.3. So yeah, that would pretty much be it. The beat is mastered. Now we'll check the rest of our beat, make sure everything sounds good. Alright, so I think that sounds pretty dope. Alright, so now, well actually we need to focus on something over here because the arrangement isn't completely done. We'll probably just do like a simple fade out over outro. Do a Control A to highlight everything. All right, so now what we're gonna do is actually export this out. So we're gonna double check, make sure everything's where it should be. There's nothing that's mono that shouldn't be mono, nothing that's stereo that shouldn't be stereo. Everything looks good. We're gonna go to File, Export, Wave. All right, and I have a folder called Stems. That's what we'll save it. New folder, and I'll call it whatever the beat is called. I called this Artisan. Right now, we can save that in here and make sure you put split mixer tracks on as well as enable master effects, enable insert effects. And then you can have whatever settings. I recommend 32-bit float, stereo, tail, cut, remainder. As long as you did that Control A and everything is highlighted in the playlist, it should be good. Now I'll hit start. Now in that folder, it gives you a couple different files you don't need, like this current. We don't need this. That's just a copy of what we have in the track. And then you also have a master file here, which is the whole track consolidated. And you have all of your stems separate. So what I also like to do is I'm going to right click new folder, name this unmastered stems. All right. And then I'm going to go over to that master and I'm going to Control C to copy it because I have another folder where I put the masters of my beats. And I'll put this in like a, let's do like a soul, my soul folder. And there's where that file is going to sit. I will go back to the stems, go back to Artisan, and we have this unmastered stems folder. Now we need to go back into FL Studio, and I'm going to turn off all of my master effects because I just want the unmastered beat now. Stay quiet since we were used to that loud version. I'm going to do a file export wave, the same thing, and export those unmastered stems into that unmastered stems folder. Same thing, split mixer tracks needs to be on, enable insert effects, enable. Now we'll go into that unmastered stems folder and do the same thing. We'll delete that current, and there's a master in here, but we're gonna actually right click, rename it, and get rid of the master and just call it unmastered beat. Okay, and then Control C and copy that. Go back into the first part of the folder and we can right click the unmastered stems, send to compressed zip folder. That's going to compress up all those stems for us, those unmastered stems. Now, while that's doing that, I have another folder for my unmastered beats. So I'll copy that over. Boom, we got that. Go back to stems, right? The folder compressed. So I can delete this regular folder of the unmastered stems since we have the compressed version right here. And then same thing, I'm going to go back and right click that main folder and do send to compressed zip folder. So now all of the stems are compressed up and ready to upload to BeatStars. Now I have a folder where my tags are. So I'm going to bring in my beat tag. Make sure you go back into your beat and put all of your master effects on, because your tagged version of the beat needs to be as loud as possible because you're showing off your beat. Remember that. If a rapper buys it, they're going to get the unmastered version so they can master their own vocals. All right, so now I'll just tag up my beat. All right, there, now that our tagged beat is tagged up, we'll just do a file export MP3 because you want it as a tagged MP3 for BeatStars, and I have a folder for that as well. Save, make sure you take the split mixer tracks off when you're exporting the MP3. You still want those enable master effects and enable insert effects. All right, and that's that. Now you have your tagged version, you got your stems, you got your exported master beat, and then you got your exported unmastered version as well. So when a rapper buys your beat, they can get those unmastered files so they can properly mix themselves in their track. Now that's pretty much it. We're just going to listen to this beat. I also will have this beat linked down below. If you want to go check it out, it's on my instrumental channel. I really appreciate a subscription over there. I drop a new beat just about every single day. Much love, everybody. I appreciate you watching this. If you watched the whole thing, you check out my shorts and my other content. It's much appreciated. Until next time, everybody, make sure you stay safe, stay striving, and always be getting it. Peace.